Welcome to Talks with Tracy, with certified hypnotherapist, life coach, and licensed mental health professional, Tracy Claremont. Tracy will share her healing journey and explore the many meaningful alternative healing methods in our world today that will support you in doing your own deepest emotional healing. So please welcome the host of Talks with Tracy, Tracy Claremont. Let the suffering end and the healing begin.
Hello and welcome to Talks with Tracy. I'm your host, Tracy Claremont, coming to you live on the Bold, Brave Television Network. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you as always to Bold, Brave Television Network for having me and giving me this beautiful opportunity. So today we bring you part 4 of our series on narcissism and narcissistic abuse. I've had the pleasure of partnering with the beautiful and amazing Ash Benavides for this series, and we've really had a lot of great discussions so far on this series. And we've talked about narcissistic family systems. We've talked about how being part of narcissistic family systems plays itself out into our adulthoods, impacting our behaviors and our relationships. Last week, we talked about personality traits common to narcissistic people, and we talked about common relationship cycles in relationships with narcissists, that being idealization, which is also called love bombing, followed by devaluing, following by discarding. We talked about all of those things, and if you haven't checked that out already, please do so. That's in Talks with Tracy number 21. A lot of good information in there, and we've covered so much, and I consider myself somebody who's fairly well versed on this topic. And in preparation for this, I've really learned from and gained more knowledge about this. And it's been a process of me as I've prepared, as I've listened to other podcasts, as I've read information. It's been a process of me putting together even more of the pieces to my own puzzle, and really continuing on in my healing with this. It's been helpful. It's really a validating experience to understand like how this happened, how I found myself to be in this relationship dynamic. And there's such a dynamic of self-blame when you're in these kind of relationships, that it's good to really draw your awareness to these cycles and behaviors and personality traits, so that you know that it wasn't you, that you're not to blame. And then it helps us to gain our courage to not be in these relationships in the future. It's really been a great growing process for me. It's validated my experience, and it's taught me even more. So it's been very helpful to me. And if it's helpful to me, I hope that it has also been very helpful to people who view this as well in your own growing and healing. It's so good to grow in our own personal experience. It's so good to join in sameness, to validate one another's experience, to really grow in healing together. I've had lots of aha moments. Now, I will say that these are experiences that I still struggle with to this day. I have a hard time talking about specific things that have happened to me in these relationships, and that's out of fear. I still hold and carry quite a bit of fear about talking about these things, and it kind of drives my sisters a little bit crazy that I don't like to really talk about specific experiences in these relationships. My sisters that I talk about, Hiccups and Martha, they were in the depths of this with me, and they saw a lot of what happened. And today, all these years later, when I still have fear around sharing and talking about it, they would like me to just speak it. And I am not able to do that yet. I'm working on it, but I'm just not quite there yet. And that's okay. I'm in my own healing, growing experience, and I still have fears that I am working on overcoming. sometimes I kind of make excuses about why I don't share. And that's a defense mechanism that I have and has been called to my attention. And, I'm sure that that's correct, that I do make some excuses around this. This is all really hard stuff to talk about, and these are real uncomfortable places to go. And I am a work in progress, sharing my experience. But I appreciate having aha moments in preparation for these podcasts and ongoing learning and healing. And I hope that it's been equally as helpful to everybody else. So, um, today, I mentioned that I have my partner in this, Ash Benavides. We're going to make some comparisons in this part 4 today. And we're going to first start by comparing our own experience and what made us vulnerable, what made us susceptible to these kind of relationships. We come from very different backgrounds, and we're gonna kind of compare and see the similarities and differences between that, and then we're going to move on to share and compare our opinions about whether or not people with narcissistic personalities can change those traits and behaviors. You might be surprised by our opinions on that. And lastly, the last comparison I'm going to ask for today, I'm going to ask Ash to compare herself a year ago, how she was, who she was, a year ago today, to how she is and who she is today after a full year of deep diving into all this, raising her awareness um, around narcissistic abuse, learning, educating herself, going to those places within to really see how her own emotional experience played itself into these kind of relationships. I'm going to ask her to compare herself a year ago to herself today. So I am so very thankful that I've had Ash here to help me with this discussion. She does such a beautiful job of sharing and talking about her own experiences. So let's just waste no more time. Let's bring Ash on and welcome her. Please joining me in welcoming the beautiful and amazing Ash Benavides.
Hello.
Hey, good morning. How
Good
are you?
morning. Pretty good, pretty
How,
good.
Good, good. Thank you again for joining us. I can't believe it's already part 4 of our brief little series here, but time just flies by. I know that you're having you're out there on that ranch and having those experiences. So thank you for taking time out of your day to be here again. Ash, you know me pretty well, and that we come from pretty different backgrounds. I'd love to just jump right into some of these comparisons we're going to make today and talk about what it was from your perspective that made you vulnerable and susceptible to these narcissistic relationships, like finding yourself in these relationships. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that it really stems from my childhood and my father. There's a saying that
Mm-hmm.
girls tend to look up to their dads and boys look up to their moms. I mean, it's kind of time and time again. And with my dad, he was well, I didn't know until I realized that he was pretty narcissistic, and the world, all of us were just sort of players around his reality. And I think
Mm-hmm.
when your entire life, when you're young and you're learning this as a woman, you tend to start seeking that kind of behavior out with other partners or people in your life, relationships in your life.
Mm-hmm. Without even knowing it, right? Without even
Yeah.
having the awareness, because are our minds like what's familiar to us, and that's what kind of keeps us in these relationship patterns and draws us to people who behave in similar ways.
Yeah.
So,
I think that it's like subconscious conditioning is sort of what I look at it as. You're not even aware
mm,
of it, but it's part of your reality. And that's what you don't even realize you're seeking that out. And then I think a part of it too is like since your whole world is like to please this person, you end up following in these relationships or friendships that are the same thing, whether it's friends or partners. You get that for me, I got it from the family I was raised in.
right. So you did mention when you have that experience of trying to essentially make somebody happy, be in their good graces, um, please somebody, that can definitely lead to those people pleasing behaviors that we've talked about before. And then also it really lays a foundation for us to kind of devalue ourselves and not stand up for our own um, positive good treatment in relationship. Again, our minds moving towards that which is familiar to us. And it's interesting how we don't even have awareness of these repeating patterns a lot of times. Is that your experience?
Oh yeah, I didn't realize it till way later in life. I think that in my story, and I think maybe perhaps a lot of people's stories, if you're subjected to abuse in any form when you're young, that really sets a foundation because your mind is growing, your whole world is developing. And so I think when we have, especially in narcissistic dynamic, family dynamic, um, I mean, again, like when we had that one show, like there was a part of me that knew something was wrong with my family, which is why I left at a young age. But I
Mhm.
didn't know what that was. It just was
Mm,
so confusing. But yeah, I think when you have that upbringing, it's almost like part of your brain is regulated in that. So
mm,
it's very difficult, I think, for especially if people start to recognize their first step is if they come from an abusive family. That takes a lot of work, for most people to get out of. I think for me, again, just because I was the black sheep, it was like, well, I'm jumping off a cliff. I'm doing this. I need to understand this, and I can't expect other people to have the same results in their journey because that's a tough one. Very tough.
right. Yeah. And I do think it's really fascinating that even with your having a bit of awareness, like something's wrong with my family, this does not feel good, I'm out of here, I'm leaving. Even with that kind of awareness, it still wasn't the kind of awareness that you needed to not to then repeat the relationships, right? Because you went from the narcissistic family relationship dynamic and seeing that that just did not feel good, was not for you. You escaped it, and then you gravitated towards other relationships with similar patterns, even.
Right.
So I
Right.
think that's very, very interesting. And then you have described moving through these relationships with people with narcissistic traits without really having awareness around narcissism and what was happening, and kind of moved from one relationship like that to another. So I think that really speaks to the complexity of all of this. And uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, and the importance of raising our awareness around these dynamics. And that's why, when I was saying how preparing for these shows, I have still continued to have these moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what that was. Or I'm still putting those pieces together even after being very well educated around those things. Now I'm not involved in those relationships any longer, which I'm so thankful for, my own healing and my own awareness. But I'm still kind of putting the pieces together from my past relationships in gathering my understanding. And um, is that the case for you as you learn more and more? Are you still putting those pieces together?
I think like because I mean, which I didn't touch base on because I was in that crash and hit my head.
No.
I
Well,
kind of went full throttle with the research, and I wouldn't say I'm still putting the pieces together at this point. I would say
mm,
that I've gotten to the place of accepting. But
okay.
again, I don't think that's like most people's journeys. I think it's difficult for people to even get what I did in a year was sort of, fast tracking healing because I'm
Mm,
just determined, like, and again, not everyone has that. Some people, um, and I think that's just, I'm also a reflective person. I do believe our culture
mm,
is geared to focus on pain and suffering. I do think that's like the
mm,
stem of Americans versus, looking at life positively. Like if I hadn't have gone through all the suffering that I went through, I wouldn't be here now. Right. And very
Right.
educated in that. So I don't find myself hanging on to that.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to my siblings here and there. I don't feel, close or desirable to get close to people in my family. And that also could play into, like like I said, I had a head injury, and sometimes those
Mm-hmm.
things carry over, and, but it's not for
Right.
everyone.
I think you make an excellent point that sometimes we get caught up in like our identity gets caught up in our pain and our trauma and our suffering. That's like who we identify as being who we are, as opposed to our authentic selves who has had has had these experiences of pain and suffering and trauma, but that's not who we are. That's not our authentic self. And sometimes we do get caught up in defining ourselves as just a product of our pain and suffering, or not a product of, because I think there's a lot of learning in pain and suffering, like you're saying, but really defining ourselves as being this damaged person, as
Correct.
opposed to somebody who's been through a lot of stuff and has connected again to the authentic self prior to the pain and suffering. So I'd love to talk more about that. It's time to take a commercial break, but when we come back, I'm just going to briefly share how I was susceptible and vulnerable to these relationships, and in my own, what I've come to know about myself. And then we're going to answer some questions about, whether or not we think people with personality traits of this nature can change. So please join us for that after the break. You're watching Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television Network. We'll be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick, Wednesdays 7 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave Media Network and TuneIn Radio. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to EasySense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's EasySense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Welcome back to Talks with Tracy, coming to you live on Bold Brave Television Network. Now, before the break, Ash, you had described to me and to all of us how you, what your thoughts were on how you were susceptible and vulnerable to narcissistic relationships, talking about your coming from a family that had a narcissistic family system dynamic. And, we both really come from very different backgrounds. And I know, Ash, quite a bit about me, but I really come from the opposite kind of background in childhood that you were raised within. I was blessed with two parents who were very kind and loving, very altruistic. They really believed in that, giving people a hand up, second chances, forgiving, really trusting and believing in the good of people. And I was raised within all of that. My dad, he was the director for the Kicking Horse Job Corps Center, and that was the only all Native American Job Corps Center in the United States. But it was all focused on educating young people and teaching them a trade to give them a good start in their life. And we lived on center. It was kind of our life. And then my parents, they also owned the Dairy Queen in our little town. And my mom, she essentially did that same thing at the Dairy Queen. She employed people, she nurtured them, she loved them, she supported them, she helped them with their problems, she gave them second chances. I can remember my parents bailing people out of jail so they could come to work.
Wow.
Things like that. And I can remember my dad sitting at the kitchen table with people who would come, kind of like a pawn shop vibe. They'd come with something like beadwork or guns or something like that to give to my dad so he could give them the money that they needed to help them out of whatever situation. But he'd also kind of counsel them in their situation and just hear them and value them and support them and do things like that. So I watched that all my childhood growing up. And it was a great experience, and I'm super thankful for that. I do think that maybe it kind of caused me to have some blinders on to the fact that not all people have positive, good intentions. Some people are out there who are, invested in themselves only and willing to manipulate, take advantage of people. Some of those traits we talked about last week, I really, I really didn't know about. In fact, I think you mentioned this too, that I didn't know that narcissism was even a thing, until I was well into these relationships. And didn't you say that too? Did you not really know that narcissism was a thing until you started learning about it and educating
Yeah.
yourself? Yeah, so I have an agreeable kind of personality type, and that is much as close to being an empathic personality type as you can get, right? So I have a tendency to direct my attention to like the good of the world and society and be in a positive impact. And cooperative. These are personality traits in me. Kind of trusting for sure, sympathetic, and really that kind of made me a sitting duck for narcissistic abuse. And I also had some other things going on where I described in the first couple of shows I did, where I had a need to be invisible and like treated myself like I didn't matter, which really amplified my vulnerability, I would say. So interesting that you and I come from two totally different backgrounds and ended up in the same place in
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think one
so
of the things that I learned in all of mine, though, is I definitely found ways to run. So the flight
mm,
mode kicked in. Even with my
mm,
last partner, I wasn't comfortable. I think, again, I really reiterate, if we kind of like tap into our primal
mm,
humanness, right? If you're uncomfortable, and I've just really fine tuned that, like when I'm uncomfortable, I bolt, I run,
mm,
or I find a room out, find a way out. And so that was something that I had to really see, is like, wow, I'm really in touch with something very primal, because if we were all connected in that way, like animals are, we would know, run, right? This person's dangerous.
mm,
And yet we see in our society at an all-time high where people are running to it. It's like, oh, chaos, neglect, just danger. Let's just go into
mm,
it. It's sort of like this spoon-fed reality. Because now on the other side, witnessing other women and men, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why would you run
mm,
into the storm, into a tornado? You run away. So I think there's a part of people that just aren't dialed into that First thing we go back to, if you feel something's wrong, bolt. If it doesn't feel right,
Right.
the other person, whether it's a friend or a partner, cannot communicate and address things and grow with you, then I would say it's a huge, all the red flags on the planet go the other direction. But for some reason, people are running to it.
And I would say that that reason is, their core beliefs about themselves, and that their own insecurities that are triggered, and then the dynamic of manipulation that happens. When you're in a narcissistic relationship and the narcissistic person senses that you're feeling like something is not okay, and you're gonna bolt, bless you,
Right.
you're gonna bolt, then that's when the gaslighting starts, the manipulation starts, things like that, to make you feel like there's something wrong with you, and that you're to blame, and that you just need to try harder, and all these dynamics when you don't have your awareness. And I love what you're saying about trusting your intuition, because that's what
Right.
you're saying. But what happens instead when we're caught up in these relationships is we totally second guess those intuitive messages, and we don't listen to our own intuition that is telling us that there's danger here. And it's chaos and it's confusion. I know, in relationships that I've had like this, I've apologized for things that are just ridiculous to apologize for, but there I was trying to do better, trying to fix it, trying to please you know trying to please people who were not able to be pleased. It was just like a never ending battle. So it gets super confusing and super chaotic, and people can get caught up in these relationships for years. But I absolutely agree that if we go to our primal instincts, we listen to our intuition, when we have that like WTF moment, right? We listen to that, and when we notice that somebody is not able um, to show you empathy, or to understand your experience, or even willing to hear it or be accountable at all for their behaviors, those are those red flags that you're talking about, that should be a sign for us to run, right?
Correct. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that if we scale it down, we'd save ourselves a lot of time on just,
Mm-hmm.
self building up, like I can get out of this, I can do this, trust your instinct. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
self
Mm-hmm.
affirmation do work. I would say that's what helped me get out of, I mean, I left my whole family, like not just one or
Mm-hmm.
two, the entire family I have nothing to do with.
Mm-hmm.
The same with ex friends as well as partners. And what's interesting is I'm okay when they get mad. I've learned that art. When they start to deflect stuff on me and do all the gaslighting, I just kind of give a thumbs up and I'm like, all right, have a nice life. And I think that that's just something that we have to like get to like a place of, you know, that's that letting go, or we're going to hang on to this forever, right? Someone today wrote something on their feed about, the biggest act that's so courageous is like forgiving the person that's wronged you. And I was like, and praying for them, whatever that prayer is. I'm like, I absolutely do that. I absolutely send love to the people that have, basically lit the sagebrush on fire and burned my reality down. And then I just kind of, you're kind of leveling up in that way, right? Because you're taking the high road. Once you get out of the water and you climb the mountain, you're on top. And when that happens, you're able to discern all this behavior. And for me, I just laugh at it. I'm like, wow, I wasted a lot of years of my life, but I have hopefully some more in a different reality, because once we get help, we also have to help ourselves, and that's how
Mm-hmm.
we'll be able to snap out of these things.
Right. So, and I think another thing that happens within these relationships, and is a real dynamic that keeps us sucked in, is this hope and belief that the person we're with, the person with the narcissistic personality traits, the hope that they can change. So, what are your thoughts about whether or not somebody with these personality traits can change?
I do think narcissists and, I don't know, maybe not sociopaths and psychopaths, I don't know. But I do think that if a person's willing to get help and has, I'm not sure the term, has that moment in their reality, like catastrophic, world
Mm.
crushing moment, and they have a window to get help, I do believe people can change. I absolutely believe that, it kind of goes in that whole thing of, we talk about, Alan Watts likes to talk about like reincarnation. Well, the Tibetan belief is you're not the same person you were a week ago. There is no tomorrow and there is no yesterday. There's only today. And I love that because we can change each day if we put our mind to it. The power of the mind is uncomprehendable. I mean, we don't even have enough research. But if a narcissist, because there's a couple I follow on Facebook that are educating, goes to psychotherapy and addresses their issues consistently, I think that they can, it's a gradual process that they can
Mm-hmm.
change. But I think the
Right.
first step is realizing they're destructive.
Right. Right. And, typically the reason people go to therapy is because they're at a place where they're experiencing so much emotional pain that and distress like themselves, that they are needing a change and they're needing help to relieve this emotional pain. And in these with narcissistic people, they're actually placing that pain on other people, like they're causing pain to others as opposed to like experiencing the pain themselves. So they don't necessarily feel like they need therapy a lot of the time. I do appreciate what you're saying, and I want to talk about, like, the varying degrees, like the continuum of severity of narcissistic personality traits and whatnot, and also, uh, the commitment that it would take to change these kind of personality traits. We already need to take another commercial break, and we're going to break for that, but we're going to pick up right where we left off. When we come back, you're watching Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television Network. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like, it was almost instant. Like, I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic on the BBM Global Network, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back to Talks with Tracy. With me, Tracy Claremont, and the beautiful Ash Benavides. We're talking today. We're bringing you part 4, actually, of our series on narcissistic abuse. And prior to the break, we were talking about whether or not we believe people with narcissistic personality traits can actually change their behaviors. And I love your compassion for humanity and people. Ash, you know, you were talking about how you do believe all people can change with a commitment to really doing that work. And if I didn't believe that, I would be like the worst mental health therapist in the world, right? If I didn't believe that people can change. So I certainly do believe that people can do their personal healing and work. When it comes to people with narcissistic personality traits, I mentioned that, you know, they exist on this continuum of severity. So there's people who are mildly narcissistic, and then it goes all the way to the extremely frightening people who are, you know, severely narcissistic and really dangerous, harmful people. And we generally uh, encounter people who are mid-range. Uh, you know, they don't often come to therapy. If they do come to therapy, a lot of the times they come to therapy to talk about the problems that their child has or their partner has as opposed to them. So I personally, in 30 years of doing therapy, haven't worked with narcissistic people because they haven't presented themselves to therapy to want to change. That's one of the personality traits, is lacking insight into
Right.
the role they play in these problems, and they really don't see themselves as creating the problems in their life. So they
I'd like to
don't
say
really.
the extreme of it, because now that you say this, you know, if it's a spectrum, like there's a few people I can say that are like on the breaking the scale that will never. I could say my
Yeah.
last roommate is one, my dad, my ex's mother.
Um,
They would
oh.
be on that extreme um narcissistic,
Mm.
where there's not even blinders you can still see. They're just
Oh.
completely, you know,
Blind.
in the dark. And so that makes sense. I think maybe people with less, you know, if it's based on a scale, like if the more intense it is, the less
Mhm.
likely they're going to change. And then if they are, you know,
Mhm.
in the middle or on a lower, have narcissistic traits, but not fully
Mhm.
narcissistic, they can change, which would make more sense.
Right, correct. And you know, it does exist on you know, a scale of severity, and the more maladaptive the behaviors are, the harder, the more rigid they are, and the harder they are to impact and create change within. And you know, when we're talking about personality traits, I described my agreeable kind of personality. But if we think of your personality, you know, you're pretty introverted. Is that correct?
Yeah. I don't like people and I don't like going out.
So just imagine if you were expected to be the opposite of what you are. So if you were expected to just absolutely enjoy people so much, find yourself in big social gatherings all the time, and just visiting and loving people, and you know, maybe even what are some other personality traits do you have? You have a lot of compassion for
I
people.
do. Yeah. A lot of
Yeah.
compassion and caring
So
and
maybe,
empathy.
yeah, exactly the opposite of that, where you were like completely self-centered. You didn't really care about other people. You know, other people's experiences, their experience. It's not yours. You don't care. If you were, um, if you were expected to be all of those things, which is the opposite of your personality, you know, how easily would it be to be that way consistently for the
I
long
don't think
run?
consistently. I've definitely tried it. I've tried to be mean and detached. And I think like our society has like, you know, we don't have a world for introverted people. So there was an expectation my entire life to be in these settings. So it was forced, absolutely. Like now as I've sort of gotten older, I'm like, I'm doing what I want, which is not that. And, you
Mm.
know, it's okay to be a hermit and love being by yourself and in nature. And some people think, oh, it's from trauma. And I'm like, no, I was this way as a child. But you're right. I think it was being forced to be social and outgoing was really uncomfortable for me. Yeah. I mean, I think there was a
Mhm.
chunk of my life. I tell people I used to drink because I was so uncomfortable. And
Mm.
these settings, you know. And then the same with being like really detached and sort of not a nice person. It didn't feel good. I mean, which,
Mm-hmm.
and I wonder, you know, do narcissists ever think about that? Like, this isn't that fun.
Mm. Well, it is for them because that's who they are, how they are, right? That's what they're used to. That's where their comfort lies. And the point I make by asking you about your own personality is that it's no easier for a person with narcissistic personality traits to change those traits than it is for you or I to change our own personality traits. It's just as much a struggle. And then what typically happens, even if you do have somebody who is working on themselves and trying to draw their awareness to these traits and make changes, when we are put under stress, it's that rubber band effect. We snap right back into our old
Right.
ways and our old personality traits. And so it's really very difficult to for any human to change their personality traits, and narcissistic people are no exception to that rule. In fact, the more maladaptive the behaviors, the more rigid. So it's even harder, I would say, for somebody with these traits to create those kind of behavioral changes and changes in their thinking. So, that's just kind of my thoughts on do they change? So I do want to ask you you've talked about how you are today um, versus how you were a year ago. I know a year ago you really started this deep dive in looking at yourself and um, how your own thoughts and behaviors, beliefs about yourselves self played into these relationships and whatnot. Can you do a comparison, like who you were and how you were a year ago to who you are and how you are a year later?
Yeah, I mean, I was a mess. I was not happy. Um, I was really confused. I think I spent majority of my life confused, which is a lot of years. And I felt stuck and really insecure and uncomfortable and sort of longing for something. And then as I just changed over time, I really learned about self-love and accepting myself for who I am. And I thought, because
Mm.
there was a world out there that's like, Ash, you're amazing. I never saw it. I'm like, and sometimes I still say it. I'm like, I'm not that great, whatever. But I think what really shifted for me was like, I let go of that suitcase of chaos and
Mm.
traumatic stuff and pain. And I was like, I described to you, and others, I'm like, I feel like my life was this big book with different sections and chapters, and I just shelved it. I just put it away, and now I have this blank book in front of me for the rest of my life. And but I would say that very different person than I was a year ago. I was constantly crying. I didn't understand why, which was
Mm.
the same as my dad. Why can't I be loved? Why doesn't he love me? Why did he do this? Why? And, now I just sort of accept it, and it's okay. I'm like, well, this is how it went, and they're not happy people. This has nothing to do with you. And, I think what saved me in life was I just dove down the rabbit hole. There's so many podcasts, like, there's a
Mhm.
podcast that was like 10 minutes, maybe less, for maybe his name is Dinesh, about the narcissistic family, and he's Hindi, so he already talks kind of funny to me, and it just changed everything. I was like, this is not only my family, this is my ex. Like, I was drowning in toxic. And all I knew is I wasn't comfortable. That's it. And now I would say the difference is I'm comfortable. I'm doing what I love. I'm riding horses more. I'm living the life I want to live. And it's very peaceful. I
Mm.
live on a ranch that's isolated, 25,000 acres. I love that it's sort of that utopian for someone that's been through the ringer with people. But that's,
Mhm.
that would say the
Right.
change.
And also like a utopia for an introverted person,
Yeah.
right? That's you getting back to your authentic self. So
Yeah.
you shedding all of the layers of experience, shedding all of the expectations of others as opposed to yourself, doing that work on yourself to validate your experience, to appreciate yourself, to be compassionate with yourself, offer your own self grace. A lot of times we can be so compassionate to other people,
And
right?
we're
We
not.
can offer them so much grace and just be so understanding. And then in our heads, we have a dialogue that, oh my God, you're so stupid. How did you let yourself be in this situation? And
Right.
how embarrassing and humiliating. I mean, we could say really mean things within our own heads, and but offer so much grace and kindness and compassion to others. And it sounds like you, at some point, started offering that kind of compassion and understanding and validation to yourself and your own experience.
Yes. Yeah. I would say that was what happened. And it took a year to get there. I don't know the time when it just hit. It just hit. And I thought, I think I shared something that was really resonant. People typically do this, people that have come from a copious amount of trauma. Does this person like me? Does
Mm.
he like me? Does this girl like me as a friend? Am I good enough for them? Now I do the opposite. I'm like, do I like this person? Do I want
Mhm.
this person in my life? And more often than not, especially because I have my 3 golden rules with just people, whether they're narcissists or not, I will always attract them. I can choose now to walk away. I can say, you deserve better in life. And, I think, again, I use that sort of being in the muck and being stuck. And once you get unstuck, it's so much easier. The climb out is easier than it being in it.
Yes, absolutely. So, like I said, I'm a work in progress. You're a work in progress as well, and we're all kind of in this same boat, right? And that's a great thing. So we're gonna break for a commercial, and when we come back, we're gonna share some final thoughts. And I know, Ash, you always have such beautiful, inspirational kind of words for us. I look forward to hearing that. So please join us after the break. You're watching Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television Network. I'll see you in a minute.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality? But it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating. Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like it was almost instant, like I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic on the BBM Global Network, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back to Talks with Tracy, coming to you live on the Bold Brave Television Network. I'm here with Ash Benavides. She was just drawing a comparison to where she was a year ago to where she is now and the healing that she's really done by kind of going down that rabbit hole, right, Ash, and really going to those uncomfortable, most sensitive places and looking at your experiences and the emotions attached to those experiences and how you came to be at this place, a year later. You're talking about doing that deep dive inward and really drawing your awareness to things and returning back to your intuitive kind of knowings. And it's really brought about, it sounds to me, it's really brought about a sense of freedom for you.
Yeah, I think that, the biggest thing that was a life changer was I'm not going to please other people. My job isn't to make other people
Mm.
happy. I'm going to focus on my
Mhm.
happiness. And, I look back now because it's actually been quote close to a year to my first breakup, if you want. It was a discard with my now ex. And I look at this and I'm like, wow, I'm so glad he left me. Because like then I was like, I don't understand.
Mm.
And I was very defensive. My entire life I spent very defensive because when you're in these abusive relationships, you start entering their own little, it's a game to them. And so, yeah, it's become quite peaceful once I did, once you open up Pandora's box. And I think for me, the hardest part was also letting go of friends. I mean, people that I have hung out with and just sort of doing a assessment of my peers. And I was like, oh boy, like you've basically hung out with 80% narcissists your entire life. And now it's quiet, it's beautiful, it's zen, and I'm happy. I'm at peace and
Mhm.
not defensive
Right.
anymore.
And focusing on yourself does not make you selfish, which is
Right.
how, when you're in the midst of these relationships, any kind of attention paid to yourself is made out to be you being selfish and only thinking of yourself. So coming out of that and being like, wow, I matter too. I am important as well. And focusing on myself is a good thing. It's a healthy thing. It's something I need to do so that I can be, really reach my fullest potential and really love and accept myself. So that does bring about a great amount of freedom. It might feel foreign to you at first, or it might
Yeah.
even feel like it's not okay. But if you could push through those kind of feelings and really, again, have that kindness, love, compassion for yourself, then you can get to that place where, you know, uh, focusing on yourself feels really good. And I also like what you're saying about how we have to be willing to lose people in our
Yeah.
lives, in this process of standing up for ourselves and retaking our autonomy back and whatnot, because there will be people who don't support us. It might even be surprising to us. You might be surprised that you're not supported by some people, and that's okay. It's this process of letting go that you mentioned.
It
Yeah.
is, absolutely. I think letting go is it was hard at first. I mean, I can tell you one of
Mm,
one of the friends I let go of was over 20 years of friendship. And there's a couple
mm,
more that I just haven't done the breakup. I just know what they are and just sort of
mm,
let them do their thing. Um, but as far as physical and like what I choose in my life, boy, I really scaled everything down to like less than a couple. And that was hard. It was very difficult. It was like I did a inventory, which I think
mm,
when you do an inventory of your life and you unroll that tangled ball of yarn and you untie the kinks in it, you start to learn so much about not only yourself, you learn like what you come from. I think I'd mentioned before, I always thought I was kind of cool, like saying WTF, which is, confusion, right? But then as I
yeah.
learned about narcissists, I was like, dude, you're confused 90% of your life because you're surrounded by these people. This isn't
Mm,
because you're like, the heck, like, what are these people doing? It's because you're around narcissists. I mean, I was a
mm,
magnet for them, and it's so cool to have the aha moments And then you
Mm.
kind of take note. Like I took note on my family. I'm like, you're the black sheep. It's easy for you to run. It's easy for you to say, no more. I'm done. I haven't talked to him, you guys, in 17 years. My brothers played different roles. So it's difficult for
Mhm.
them. One wants to still be in the graces. The other one
Mm.
still struggles. And so everyone had a different role, and I was the forgotten one. So I was sort of like, I
Mhm.
had an out, an exit.
Yeah.
And instead of the
Right.
sad story of like nobody loved me, my father didn't want me, the men I was with
Mm.
never loved me, I changed and I decided to say, you were so solid, you were too much for these people. You were so
Mm.
encouraging and wanting good in the world. They want to stay negative, that they can't handle you. You're like kryptonite. So I turned it
Mm.
around because for years I was like, nobody loves me, everybody hates me, I guess I'll go eat.
Oh,
And I
I
flipped
love
it.
that. Yeah, you flipped the script, you changed your narrative, right?
I did.
And that was all changing your beliefs and about yourself, and it allowed you to have this freedom. I so appreciate you. I so appreciated you doing this series with me. I couldn't have chosen a better partner. Can you please tell people, Ash, how people might get a hold of you or follow you on social media?
Yeah, so I have just Instagram and Facebook. I'm mostly doing Instagram of sort of snippets and wisdom, like on my travels, and it's Wild Spirit W, and then a number one LDSPIRIT. And then on Facebook, it's Ashlyn Benavides Rufio. Pretty easy name to come up with. It's a real long, sort of Mexican native name, so AISLING, and then Benavides, just as it sounds. So yeah, happy to connect
Awesome.
with
Well,
anyone.
great. Thank you so much for doing this series with me. Again, I so appreciate you. It's already time to wrap up our show, but next week I'm going to be hitting on some take-home points that you and I have talked about. It'll just be me, but I'll be hitting on some of those kind of takeaway points that we've made, getting to some of the things that maybe we didn't get to. Kind of closing out this series on narcissistic abuse. So that'll be what I'll be doing next week. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching today. And thank you, Ash, for joining me. You've been watching Talks with Tracy on the Bold Brave Television Network. Please join me next week. We'll see you later.
This has been Talks with Tracy. Join us each week as Tracy and her guests will come together and realize that underneath it all, we are all the same and never alone. So join us each week and let Talks with Tracy be your safe place to land in your healing journey. Right here, Thursdays, 11 a.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV.